Call the meeting to order. City of Anamosa City Council, regular session, Monday, April 13th, 2020, 6 p.m. 1.0 roll call.
Crump,
Here.
Smith,
Here.
Mockart,
Here.
Zumba,
Here.
Stout,
Here.
Capron,
Here. 2.0 Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Prior to moving to 3.0 agenda approval, we will, Rebecca Vernon, who is quarterbacking the Zoom meeting, has a few words of instructions.
Hi,
Rebecca.
Hi, everybody. So for those of you who are tuning in through Zoom, when it comes to the point where the public is allowed to make a comment, or you are a presenter and have something that you need to present for the council, we're going to ask you to raise your hand. For those who have not done that before, I'm afraid I can't provide exact instructions for how to do that on a smartphone or a tablet if you're tuning in that way. But if you're on a desktop, if you hover over sort of the picture, there should be a participants button. If you click on that button, a list of participants should appear on probably the right-hand side of your screen. And somewhere in that area, there should be a button that says raise hand. You would just click on that. That'll raise your hand, letting me know that you'd like to speak on the subject. And when it comes time for public questions or comments, I will let you know when it's your turn to talk. For those of you who are tuning in through a telephone, just by calling in, you can raise your hand by simply typing into the keypad *9, the little asterisk sign, and then 9. So that'll let me know that you want to talk, and I will then unmute you as well. So I think that's everything I have.
Thank you, Rebecca. Again, when it comes to any type of vote on tonight's agenda items, we will do everything by roll vote. 3.0 agenda approval.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Kay, second by Alan to approve the agenda that is in front of us. Any questions or comments?
Capron,
Yes.
Stout,
Yes.
Zumba,
Yes.
Mockart,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Crump,
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously. 4.0, motion to approve minutes from the following meeting. 4.1, March 23rd, 2020, regular council meeting.
So moved. Second.
Motion by Jeff, second by Rich. Is that correct? I want to make sure I heard.
Correct.
Thank you. Any further discussions on the minutes or in the motion? Yeah.
Smith,
Yes.
Mockart,
Yes.
Zumba,
Yes.
Stout,
Yes.
Capron,
Yes.
Crump.
Yes.
Motion to approve the minutes as they were submitted carried unanimously. 5.0, Public hearings, none. 6.0 proclamations, none. 7.0 old business. 7.1 discussion and possible action on fiber optic vaults within the right of way.
I guess maybe I should start because I'm the one that started this in the first place. I've gone back and taken a look at some of these vaults that they put in, and they actually look worse now this year than they did last. Dirt is rolling away from it. Nothing was seeded. The one in front of my yard, there's more dirt that's caved in. There's things that they could have done and should have done, and I saw how they put the one in mine and they didn't. I have talked to other contractors that do this type of work, and there was and I asked one of the questions, can they bury these vaults? Because I was told they could not, and he said yes, they did in a town in North Dakota. He had discussed with me what they'd done. These vaults, when they bury them, all they have to do is put in a layer of gravel for drainage, and then put a shallow layer of pea gravel above that to keep the varmints from getting in to the vaults themselves and keeping the area dry. And my problem with this thing is that they did two things wrong when they started putting these fiber optics in. Number one, they did a shoddy job. That's obvious. Rich, I believe you said you'd come over and taken a look at some of them. But the other thing they did is, from what I've discussed with a friend of mine who works on fiber optics, they're supposed to put them near other utilities and keep them together. And what they did, and the way he explained it, is they found the easiest place to put it and just put it there. Anybody that wants to take a look at some of these, if they want to stop over during the day, I will take them on a tour of the disaster that this company started. It all can be repaired, of course, but I believe when they signed this contract, I think that said that they were supposed to put everything back the way it was. Now we can, I read your comment, Jacob, but we can read that two different ways. And one of them is that there was grass there before they put that vault in. There's not grass there now. I happen to be one of the upset citizens in the city. I'm also on the council. But they left a disaster in front of my house. I got two of them. They tore up my flower bed, threw dirt over into my yard, not in the right of way, and covered up a bunch of plants and killed them. When I asked them if they'd saved the plants, they said, "What plants?" And the one in front of my flower bed in the rock garden in the corner there has got, the kids get off the school bus. Now this year they're not because the school's closed now, but they run across my yard. And I don't yell at them. I used to do it when I was a kid. They don't hurt nothing. But if one of them was looking back at a friend and stepped in that, he could snap an ankle. So if anything, we need to make sure that they fix all these problems. And I would say that we shouldn't allow him to come back in here until they're fixed. And I do think, and this is my own opinion, of course, but I think they should be buried. Our city, if you go over there and start looking around, it's starting to look like we built our property, our houses on an abandoned cemetery. It's upsetting to me, to say the least. So I'll back out now, but that's pretty much where we're at with this guy right now. I will say one other thing. He's lied to me 3 times, and his contractor lied to me once. I can't prove it. I don't have anything to prove it, but there are 2 types of people I don't like, and that's thieves and liars. And so I have very little respect for this guy at this time either.
Well, Al, it's an appropriate time to be talking about this because actually out by us a couple weeks ago, you've probably seen, but there's a different company I talked to them. They came through. There's everywhere you see those tall wooden stake with a red tie around it. They're coming through again. And this time it's going to be, I think, through Alliant Energy, but we're going to have the same mess again. I mean, of them boring and doing all that. So
Yeah, that's something we have to put up with. I mean, we can't stop this from happening. It's actually, it needs to happen. I understand that for sure. But when one of my arguments with him is, why can't you bury me? He says, well, we need access. I've lived in that on that property now for over 20 years. We've got other cables and wiring down there, and I have yet to have anybody dig in my property until they put this in. The next time they may have to come in to fix anything is 10 or 20 years from now. And generally speaking, when a wire gets damaged, it's because some contractor goofed up and broke the wire. So they know where it's broke. So to get into that vault is not necessary. So why leave it set out on top of your property for 10, 20 years with nobody needing to use it? And why can't you have 6 inches of dirt over top of it with some grass? I'm a farm boy. I'm pretty sure that with a shovel, I could dig that out in a very quick hurry.
yeah.
So,
Well, the question
Well,
is, sorry, I'll go. Sorry, Rich.
go ahead, Jeff.
Well, I was just gonna say real quick. The question I would have is, Al, I agree. I think, in some areas out there they are by the common utility boxes between the property lines, but some aren't, like yours. The other thing is, if more companies start doing this, can they share vaults? Or are we gonna have vaults all over the place?
well, that's one of my concerns.
Because like between the existing houses, now you have about 3 boxes. One's phone, one's electricity, and one's the different internets. I'm not sure if they share a box or not, but I would think if that's possible that, anybody going forward doing this fiber would share the vaults if at all possible, to limit the number that are there. So that's all.
My fear is that
If I could respond.
my fear that the contract that he got pretty much just gives him permission to do it. So he's kind of got a blank check. We have to have a little more control over how our city is used, or should I say abused sometimes. So I think this is something that we need to take care of before he starts digging again, or we find somebody else to do it. He doesn't have to do it. We can find somebody else too. It doesn't have to be him.
If I could respond here, in answer to one of your questions, Jeff, this Olin was what the piping that they put in was supposed to have 6 tubes in there so they could lease space to other companies, which would minimize any other digging. On the other hand of this, they were supposed to return that ground to as near perfect as it was before, which they said they would bury the vaults deep enough that you could mow over top of them, which they have not done. They have not backfilled those vaults so that there is dirt all the way around the edging of that vault. So they have not fulfilled their obligation that they said they would do at this point in time. One of the things we have talked about in the past is, and hopefully it gets done, is we have talked about the city running the vaults and running the piping to lease to other businesses and use it as a revenue stream. But to this point in time, we have not done anything to get that accomplished. And we've talked about it for 2 years, and we need to investigate doing it, at least for the rest of the city and any new developments.
That could also be done when we're doing sewer repair or water line repairs on blocks too. We can't do the whole city, I'm sure, because it'd be cost prohibitive, but at least wherever we do run lines or do repairs, we could run those lines. And this new street that we're talking about putting up here from Dubuque Street up to up the hill, we could actually put the piping in to handle that when we do that. And the city could actually get some revenue from that.
I agree. And another easy one is the new street. It's not even in yet, but connecting Council Chamber and Caitlin. I mean, there's no sidewalks, there's no houses, there's no even street. I mean, it'd be real easy to put them in there. I was.
And this
Yeah,
is the good time to do it.
I really think we need to get a handle on this before it gets too much farther down the line. It's something we should probably really figure out how we're going to do it, when we're going to do it, and what conditions would create the possibility for us to do that.
Well, I think the other thing we got to do is on right now, for those that are already in place, is have a discussion with them about getting those things backfilled, seeded down, and getting that taken care of before they do anything else in this town.
Oh, yeah.
Or anybody else does
Oh,
anything
yeah.
else.
He needs to be stopped until that's solved.
The
Well,
contractor for
is there a
Olin
process
has
that
not
can be-
worked since last year? So
What's that?
the contractor for Olin Telephone has not worked since last year. So any of the fiber optic work is part of other projects. So that contractor has not been around for at least a year.
Since they put in those lines there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they have not fulfilled doing the backfill and the seeding. So how do we get them to do that?
I talked to the lawyer, our city lawyer, about that. I'm pretty sure the way he explained it to me, they'll be here within a few days if he gets a hold of them.
Well,
So
then
I think we've got ground to stand on this thing. He did a terrible shoddy job. His contractor actually did, but if that contractor that Jacob's talking about isn't going to be working for him this year, we don't know. But if he isn't, he'll have to find another contractor. But he's going to have to solve that problem before I'd let him do anything else.
So I guess the first
Well,
we'll
and
want
that-
to detail kind of exactly what our expectations are. Unless we really think every vault is installed incorrectly, we should probably identify which ones need repair.
Jacob,
And then-
just a heads up, you're a little quiet.
Sorry, is that better?
Yes, thank you.
yes.
So we first should identify exactly what work we need to have them do, and then we can investigate if hopefully their bond that they have to have in place for the excavation permit is still in effect, and we can use that as leverage to get them to do the work. Otherwise, we can use the bond to correct the work ourselves. If that's not the case, we lose quite a bit of our leverage, but we can still, they still have a responsibility, and so we can still work with them to get that work corrected.
Question, Jacob, is he planning on coming in and moving across the highway and doing the rest of the city, or what's his plans?
I haven't heard of any interest from Olin Telephone to continue their
That's what
fiber
I
optic
figured.
work.
He picked out
Well-
the easiest place to put the stuff in and then left.
Well, Alan, when they came in, his plan was eventually to do the rest of the town. But he also said there would be sections of the town that would not be done. And we kind of figured he would not come across 151.
Now,
He was going to hit Trailer Park and that area on that side of town, and that was going to be probably it.
yeah, like I said, what he did is he picked out the easiest part of town to put that stuff in, did it, and left. He doesn't
But
want to
I
have to
think-
deal with the other part of
Yeah.
town.
Have we contacted them and said, you need to come in and correct some of these problems?
No, we have not done that. I guess if we had specifics, we can make that contact.
You have the pictures that I took from last year?
I probably do.
I can take them again if you want.
I can double check.
If you want me to, I can
Well-
take pictures again.
Well, since it's such a
All you
compact,
got to do, all you got to do is drive out there, look around, and see what needs to be done. It's not a hard thing to do.
no, it's all compact. You go through the trailer court, and then it's about just the 4 or 5 streets out there in Meadow Ridge, and you'll see it all. It's not going to
Yeah.
take a long time to see them.
We're going to run into this a lot, I think, if we have to have a little more control over people that come in and do this stuff. And I think this is a good wake-up call for us. If anything, and this is me speaking as an upset citizen again, I realize that this vault, this coffin he stuck in my yard, is in the right city right of way. But I think we ought to have some kind of a variance to the rules here, and allow the people who want to use something, stones or whatever, to cover them up, decorate that area or something to hide them.
Yeah.
When I die, I don't mind being in amongst a whole bunch of coffins, but I'm living in them right now, and that's not a very happy thought.
Well,
That's my story, and I'm sticking to
Is
it.
there a process we can get in place? I mean, like when there's a building permit or, you put a deck on your house, I'm under the assumption that you get your building permit and somebody from the city goes and checks it out. When going forward, if we had somebody, new coming in, like Rewind before Olin came in, say, okay, you can do this, but you're going to put in a couple and we're going to come check it out and see how you're doing it. And if it's good, you can continue. But if it's not, you're going to fix them before you move forward anymore.
Yeah, we're probably not large enough city for this kind of a thing, but I discussed it with the Iowa City Utilities Director down there, and he was surprised that we didn't have any rules or regulations that was controlling this guy. I started telling him what was going on. He said he wouldn't have gotten away with it down there. We probably can't afford to hire somebody as a utilities director because we're not doing that much work that way, but it probably wouldn't hurt to assign somebody when we have a contractor come in and have them kind of responsible to keep track of these people so they aren't doing something they're not supposed to. I think that could be done easily without having to hire somebody.
Well, when they came in and got the permit to do all of this, did they have to lay out a map of where they were going to place these vaults?
Yes, and we had review over that. So there were certain occasions where we'd ask them to go to one side of the street or the other because we actually don't want them within a certain distance of our water or sewer main, because it makes it harder for us to dig if we have to repair to work around those lines. So occasionally we'd ask them to move, a little bit. We don't drastically change their route, but we do have some alterations, and we followed pretty closely. I mean, we didn't have a specific inspector, but various staff, especially Jim and Dan, because they were watching their utility lines, followed pretty closely as they went. I don't know. I mean, obviously we didn't pay that close attention to the backfill side, but we tried to keep an eye on them during the construction. So.
Yeah, I think we need to have some kind of procedures in place to not only monitor during, but also go around and check after.
Yeah.
To make sure that, and maybe we need to come up with some kind of ordinance that states, if you're going to do this, it's going to be at this specifications.
Absolutely.
And
like I said, they could have buried them. I've talked to contractors that have. They didn't, and I wish they would have. I don't know how far we can push that part of it, but if not, I'm going to put some stone on top of mine. It looks like hell.
Okay, so I know before Olin did it, a guy, I mean, I used to watch the meetings. The guy came in and kind of talked about his game plan. I can't tell you exactly what he did, but so now with Alliant coming through, and I know Macokota Valley's done some, do they have free reign? I mean, do they have to formally do anything with the city, or is it just a free for all? Anybody can come in and start running fiber? I mean, as it stands right now, what's the status?
All they have to do is get an excavation permit approved, and that includes having a bond to protect their work.
So
they don't have to have formal approval from the city. Back when we had Olin Telephone come through, we did discuss it at the city council level because it's the first community fiber optic project where they were servicing residents and businesses. The majority of the fiber optic projects are private, like Alliant is not going to be selling internet. They're connecting their different properties so that they can have internet access. data between their.
Oh, so you're not even going to be able to buy it like Makokata. You can buy Makokata Valley. You can. They're starting.
Makokata Valley may be the only other player who's going to offer it for sale to the public, but we've had several projects recently where it's they're connecting fiber optic to the cell towers to improve data to cell providers. But again, that's not something that's being sold to your house. So a lot of those projects, again, they happen. They're relatively small. But we review those. We don't discuss them at the council level at this time.
Are any of these companies going to be putting vaults in?
Well, I'm sure they're gonna be putting vaults in.
No, if they get another one of mine, I'm going to lose it.
Rich,
Well-
you were cut off, Rich. Can you?
Yeah. Well, Makokata Valley right now, they're only going to sell the residents along their route. They're not branching off into other parts of town.
Yeah. If you happen to be along the route to get to their headquarters, like our bank is one of them, but I don't think they're branching out,
Right.
all areas. But I guess with Alliant Energy, that's all the more. I mean, they're going to be tearing through the neighborhoods, but the residents aren't even getting a chance to buy it. They're basically just passing through to get it to their shop out there on Chamber, I'm guessing.
Yeah, because was it Makokata Valley brought something in from Wyoming? And they just ran a line up past the pool down Main Street to some tower down there.
I don't recall.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, because there's like a vault. They came in on 3rd Street and then went up Dubuque and then came down Main Street by the pool. And I was thinking they ran to a tower that's by Makokata Valley with fiber. And that was coming from Wyoming.
Do they have right-of-ways already? Like Alliant and Makokata Valley?
They use our right of way,
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
and they really do under the state code have access to it. We can't say you're not allowed here. We again have control to work with them on their specific location and their practices, make sure that they restore the ground back to its prior form now. But we can't say, you're not allowed here, or you can't go to this part of town or something like that.
I believe that we basically have, to me, two issues here. First issue that I think we need to address, and some of you have alluded to this, is the work that was done by the contractor under Olin Telephone Company.
Correct.
If that work is shoddy and not up to the standard that the representative who was in council that night agreed to, the level of standard to the city and or the homeowner, the property owner, then my thought is they need to come back in here and rectify the issue. They have taken out an excavation permit. They submitted plans of where the vaults and the lines were going to run. So we should be able to review that with them. And I agree, I don't believe we need to go out there and look at everyone. That's their responsibility to go out there and re-verify their work is acceptable. And we can leave it to the property owners that are adjacent to that right of way to take a look and see how level of acceptable that is. The second issue I think we have is how do we address this as we move into the future with the individual companies. Now, whether it's Alliant, Olin, or anybody else, they still have to take out an excavation permit, correct?
Correct.
So then we force them to submit the plans, the mapping of what they are going to do. And I also believe we need to have that statement in there that if they abandoned this in the future, that the city has the right to tell them to remove it from our right of way. Because who knows, 50, 100 years from now, that could be cluttered that right of way could be cluttered with
God,
a
yeah.
lot of various obsolete structures. And, you know, we're only given so much right away to start.
Yeah.
So those are just, I guess, kind of my opinion of ways to address these two separate issues.
Well, I would like to see us, you know, going forward, if an excavation permit is taken out for this purpose, like Rod said, having a map, but also having that permit and map presented and or reviewed by the council whenever that's done, so that we're more in the know, you know, as residents, because there's a lot of residents I know out by me and Alan that people, I've had a couple calls. They say, "What's this stake with red ribbon on it?" What that some people that they were hoping they were streetlights out on my street, of course. But I said, no such luck. It's more fiber. But just so we can be more informed, because I wouldn't have known unless I happened to be there when the person from Alliant was marking. So I think that would be good, if nothing else, just for us to be informed, to be able to inform the citizens. So
Yeah.
And it's good business practices.
Well,
for
nobody,
both entities to know what the other one's doing.
I think that the citizens should be notified that something's going on. Those flags were in my yard for over a month. And I tried mowing around them, moving them and stuff. And I figured they were done after a month. I pulled them out because I wanted to mow my yard. And the next day, flags are back in there again. And then 2 or 3 more weeks went by. I had no idea what they were doing. I didn't know they were going to bury a bunch of people in my yard. I can tell you that. But I agree with Rod. I think in what we need to do is set up, probably not tonight, but we need to sit down and discuss what we want to do as far as allowing people to come in here and what we expect from them. And I'm not exactly sure. I've got my own opinions on a few things, but we got to be realistic. I still think we should see if that kind of thing with those vaults could be buried. They make markers for them. I spent a whole weekend researching all this. They make tape markers. They make disc markers, satellite location, map location. They can find them things, even if they're buried 6 inches under the ground. It's ridiculous for him to say that they can't, because I know they can. Anyway, we probably should set this for some other time, some other meeting where we can discuss things that we might want done.
Go back to what you were saying about the 50 years down the road. It could be 10,
Well, it certainly
It
could.
very well could be.
because look what 10 years ago was like compared to today.
Galen, just a quick heads up that you're quiet.
All right, sorry.
So I would really like to see the council move forward with some action to address the work that has already been done with bringing that disturbed area back to an acceptable level, which, you know, filling in, seeding down. It's my opinion that we do have a little bit of teeth on that work. You know, we may,
Well,
how we move forward on future projects is something totally different, but I would like to see the council take action tonight on
Well,
that
at
previous
this
work.
point, I think it would be smart to just contact Olin, tell him this is what we expect, and give them a time frame to say, get it done in 2 weeks. If they don't get it done, then contact the city attorney and move forward.
I'll take that as a motion, Rich.
I'll
You most
second
certainly
it.
can.
So there's a motion by Rich, second by Kay, to contact Olin Telephone Company, as they were the company that we entered into the agreement, in a sense, with, to conduct necessary repairs and bring it up to a standard of, a level of standard that is acceptable. Any further conversation necessary by the council?
I'd just like to thank the council and the mayor for talking about this and listening to the complaints that I had. I'm kind of complaining for other citizens that have talked to me about this. And thank you guys for taking it seriously. I appreciate it.
Rebecca, are you seeing anyone from the public that would have further comment on this agenda or this motion item?
I do not currently see anybody, but I will take this moment to just remind people that if you would like to speak at any point, you can raise your hand at any point, and when it comes to public comment, I will let you know it's your turn to talk, or you can just send me a quick chat. But no, I don't see any comments right now.
Okay. Again, we have a motion by Rich and second by Kay as far as the action that the council is opting to take on 7.1.
Mockart,
Yes.
Zumba,
Yes.
Stout,
Yes.
Capron,
Yes.
Crump,
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
That motion carried unanimously. I guess on the second part of this, at least in my opinion, is the future work. I would like to have a motion from council that we put that either on the next meeting's agenda or, a month from now to work up some type of, I don't know if it's a ordinance or resolution of how we are going to go about contacting the community as well as the expectations we'll have with the entity that's bringing the service in.
Well, let me ask, excuse me, let me ask a question. Are you wanting to have an ordinance put together, or are you looking to just have a discussion on what we want, what we see going into that ordinance?
Well, good point, Rich. You know what? Let's have the discussion at the future meeting and see what action is driven from that.
Okay.
Could you see that that's on a future meeting agenda?
Yes.
Is the council all right with having that side of the discussion in the future?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Sounds good.
I think we could probably close out 7.1. We had two different legs there to go. 8.0, new business. 8.1, resolution adopting purchasing policy.
I'll go through this proposed policy, try to hit the high points. Obviously, if we have questions, let me know, either throughout or at the end. Section 1, just the introduction. It's basically just the kind of the expectations in a very general sense, or the spirit of the policy that all employees are expected to make wise decisions, even if they're exceed the standards, specific standards of the policy itself. Section 2 gets a little bit more specific, but still fairly general in addressing that when employees do make purchasing decisions, they need to look at, first look at, do they need the specific item? And then when they determine that need, that they are looking at all aspects of the product or service, not just the price or not just the vendor, but a variety of factors. Section 3 I'll go through some of those specific items. First, that this policy outlays our purchasing as the responsibility of each department rather than a singular purchasing department. So each department is responsible for overseeing that these policies are put into effect. There's language in here, I don't know that it gives us concrete authority, but it gives us something to work with in that we aren't bound to any purchases that don't follow these policies. It's just a statement that non-compliance with the policies can result in the cancellation of purchasing privileges for that employee and additional disciplinary actions. The transactions should not be split up intentionally to circumvent any dollar limitations within the policy. As a general rule, we do not prepay for any goods or services. If there are any exceptions to that, that would require approval from the city administrator. Employee reimbursements should be kept to a minimum, just essentially travel or emergencies. And any contracts for service that exceed 12 months would require approval from the city administrator. Any questions so far? Getting into section 4, competitive quotations. So that's really just means price shopping, I guess. It's not a formal bid that we'll get into that process later. It's just, it could be as simple as checking the price and getting the price or the item details from 2 different stores.
Well, Jacob, on that portion of it, for $500 to $999, depending on what the piece of equipment is it worth going to 2 different places if we save $25? Is it worth the extra effort? I want this to be as economical as possible, but also as realistic and simplistic as possible.
Well, it is difficult. Frankly, I started at a lower number because I don't do that much purchasing. Most of the dollars spent, are from the departments, not from the administrative department. But so I try to price just about anything that I spend money on, and that's kind of my expectation. There is language in this that, again, states even if it's not explicitly required by these dollar amounts, if it makes sense to price shop, then go ahead and do that. In discussion with the department heads, we came to that $500 to $999. We can move that for sure, but for some departments, and I want to clarify that the dollar amounts listed there are on a per item basis, not a whole, invoice or receipt dollar amount. So there are departments who may not in an entire fiscal year buy something of that value because they're buying smaller things. They may buy a lot of, smaller things, but they aren't buying larger equipment. Whereas some departments, this dollar amount is a more common occurrence. So I guess that's my thoughts on it.
Okay. Well, and the other thing in that section that I've got a note here is when available, one of those bids should be a government bid of some type. So when you're talking over $1,000, if we're talking buying a new truck, one of those bids should be a government bid.
Okay, I think that's reasonable language. We can look at adding. And I guess I do want to clarify that the number of quotes required includes the one that the employee is buying. So they're really just getting, if they have something in mind already, they obviously have that price and that information. They're really getting one additional to price check, or in the case of $1,000 or more, two additional. So I don't know. Depending on certain items, that may be more work than others. But I think for most things, that's not a huge amount of work. And again, if they cannot reasonably meet these requirements, they just have to demonstrate that and let me know. And then I guess the language in here would require the council to override this, but I mean, we could change that language to allow me to override these policies, but that's up to the council.
Now, every time, like the water plant or the wastewater plant needs chemicals, they're going to have to go through this bidding situation.
So that's a good question. This separates out products and services, and the chemicals would be, maybe a gray area. I think you could argue that's an ongoing service, even though you are acquiring a product. And so the next section on the services, there are situations where we need, you establish that relationship. It's an ongoing relationship. An example would be our engineering services. That would not require the quotations, but it does require a review no less than every 3 years to make sure that we're looking at our competitive options.
Yeah. In my business, we do, on certain items, we price them yearly, and insurance and some of the other, like Jacob was talking, insurance companies and certain businesses that supply products, we price them sometimes every 2 years. It just depends on the company you're dealing with, but I think that some of that stuff would be done that way. That would be, something we would do all the time anyway, I would hope.
Well, I think it goes to a lot of services that we utilize, the CPA firms for the audits, whoever's doing our IT, which hopefully that's going to be, you got your RFPs out. Hopefully we get that back soon. But, reading the services portion of it, one of the questions I have is when you're in here talking about getting competitive quotes for replacement of a furnace, who is writing up that RFP for the replacement of that furnace to get the competitive quotes? And are we going to be comparing apples to apples, or are we just relying on the HVAC company to say, here's my quote, they come in low, and then by the time we get all said and done, we're double the price? How are we going to process that?
Under this section, there wouldn't be an RFP required, because it would really just rely on, you could, but it would rely on whoever's getting the work done to make clear what they're wanting an estimate or a quote for. And then it would be up to those contractors to provide their quote.
Well, I mean, you've got, let's say a new furnace there's going to cost over $5,000. You say we've got a required quotes of 3. So I'm going to assume you're going to either go out and contact, or you're going to place an ad saying we would like information.
The
So
expectation is that they would contact three contractors directly and request a quote.
and again, so when we get that quote, company A comes in, says, okay, hey, I can do that for 5,000. Company B comes in and said, I can do that for 7,500. Company C says, I can do that for 10. So the company A who quoted 5 starts the project. By the time it's said and done, they're now at $10,000. How are we going to monitor that to know that the quote we're getting is a valid quote?
Apples to apples, oranges to oranges. I think what we might have to do is have them itemize what product they're using, what brand of furnace, what
Specification.
type of materials they're using, so you can compare. Sometimes you find out that $5,000 bid's got a pretty doggone cheap furnace, somebody rubbing sticks together instead of a regular furnace.
And I get that, but who's going to say, hey, the guy who bid $10,000 actually had the best legitimate bid?
Is there any way we can hold them to it?
That's what I'm asking. How are we going to substantiate this? You know, I've got no problem doing it. I just want to know how this process is going to work.
I mean, under the policy, it's really up to the employee, most likely in this case, the department head who's overseeing it, to make sure they're comparing apples to apples and that they're, working with the contractor to get a reasonable quote. I mean, we could, say that, if you're going to exceed the amount, you need, I don't know. I mean, you could say you need the approval before you do, but that could also leave us in a situation where we don't have the project complete. I guess I think the best answer is if somebody's doing that to us, that gives us cause to not hire them in the future. And it's not a great answer because you still, had them do the work once. But I think that is a factor that can be taken into consideration in these decisions. Is if we have contractors sticking us with something that severely exceeds their quote, then they're not really somebody who we want to do business with.
Well, and I think this is a case too where on some of this stuff, if we have somebody hired that we trust and we've used in the past, we give them some credibility and maybe work with them a little bit more than we would somebody who's coming in fly by night.
Yeah. And so a couple of things. I tried to put examples in my paragraphs and I'm not sure that the furnace is a great one because there are emergencies that would override this. So the furnace could very much be an emergency where I would say that these requirements aren't in effect because we need to get heat to a building in the middle of winter. But as you were stating, things that are ongoing that from the paragraph above. So we discussed kind of like water and wastewater. They have regular electrical work on their pumps and other items. And to me, that's an ongoing service. So if they have an electrician that they're comfortable with, that knows their equipment, to me, I'm comfortable with them working with that contractor. Where I would expect them to get bids is if they're doing a project that's not part of the routine business. If they're adding lights to a building or something that's more of a irregular construction project, they need to go get bids for that project. But they're a regular ongoing service. I would be comfortable with them, working with their regular contractor. Are there any other questions on this section, or should I proceed?
Go ahead.
So section 5 is pretty much straight out of state code. These public improvements of these dollar amounts require competitive quotes or competitive bids. And again, those are distinct for public improvements for cities with a population of less than 50,000. So horizontal projects, which are essentially streets, bridges, culverts, those types of things, any project exceeding $50,000 would require a competitive bid. And the next section will go through that process. There is no threshold for a competitive quote. So if it's below 50,000, by state law, we can do what we want. Again, it would fall underneath our own provisions on how we go through that purchasing. Vertical projects, which really any building project, anything that's not a horizontal. Anything above 57,000 requires a competitive quote. And anything above 139,000 requires a competitive bid.
For example, when we resurface blacktop streets, is that something we bid or quote out, or is that just a standard we use the same people all the time?
So there's also a distinction between what is road maintenance and what is a true road project. So most of our overlays we consider maintenance, and we don't do a bid on those at this time. Now, for example, streets where we completely, tore everything out and started from scratch, like I think the most recent was South Elm Street. That was bid out.
Yeah.
To the best of my knowledge, that was before me, but I believe that met the threshold that had to be a competitive bid.
So with this, are you saying every 3 years, if we're just doing street overlays, we're going to get competitive bidding because of the service agreement?
I don't know if it would require a bid because it may not deal specifically with the project, but that relationship should at very minimum be evaluated, and that could include getting bids for that summer of work. But I don't know that it would be specifically required.
Well, I'm just thinking that I think we ought to be getting bids just to hold everybody accountable.
That's it. We've had the same ones doing a lot of this maintenance work. Not saying they aren't doing good work, but to get some bids and just see if it's comparable, if there would be some savings.
I think it should be done at least every 3 years, like the previous section, but it could be done more frequently. I am very much in favor of always shopping your options. It shouldn't be seen as, some sort of negative towards your prior vendor. It's just us working for the best interest of the city. So, I'm always in favor of that.
Yeah. Just
Well, here's my next
like,
question.
No, go ahead,
Well,
Rich.
okay, thanks, Jeff. Here's my next question then. We do get that competitive bid every 3 years or reassess that. Who's doing the assessing and who's making the decision on which company to move forward with?
Ultimately, it'd really be the department head, but in certain situations, it would involve myself, the city administrator.
Well, if I'm just going off this, that says, hey, department head A, he's worked with, well, it's kind of like we had the discussion about tree trimming. Hey, this company's been in here, they've done it for years. I don't want to get a competitive bid, even though we're saying get a competitive bid. Are we leaving that up to that department head then to, hey, I like this guy, so I'm going to keep giving him work?
I guess I would say if I don't think somebody's genuinely considering their options. I would have to have a discussion with them, but I think you're right. There comes a difficulty at some point if they're left to the decision that they can make that call, even if it is just in favor of somebody they like working with.
Yeah. No, I agree with you, Rich. I mean, even if they do like working with them and they're doing a good job, I think we just need to, if nothing else, show the citizens that we are trying to be the most responsible with their money, because ultimately the ones, deciding who to go with, it's not their money per se. I mean, it's the citizens. So I think we need to make it practice, whether it's resurfacing roads, whether it's tree trimming. I think that needs to be the case.
Yeah, I think we need to have more of a say for the citizens on some of this process, as opposed to just always leaving it up to the department head for what potentially could be $100,000 contract.
Well, especially this year with that ash borer, how many trees going to have to be taken out? I think competitive bids may get some better deals if they got quite a few to do at one time.
It wouldn't take that much to get the department heads and everybody on the same page on this. I can give you an example too, because I was dealing with an insurance company for quite a few years, and I really liked the guy, and he always took care of us, and he was always checking on our building and stuff, but I kept noticing that our insurance was creeping up. So I started doing some shopping around, and that's when I brought this up just earlier, that I started shopping insurance every 2 years. Once he realized that, he now comes to me, and he's a broker, and he makes sure that I've got the best deal. And he's jumping the gun before I even start shopping, because he doesn't want to lose me. So I think if contractors knew that this was one of our policies, even the department heads can explain that to the people they're working with. As long as they know that's one of our policies, it's going to keep them, not saying that everybody's that way, but just for lack of a better way of putting it, it's going to keep them honest.
Yeah.
If they want to continue their business, they'll be competitive.
Yeah,
exactly. We need to kind of rein this spending in and get it so that everybody knows we're trying to conserve as much money and be as fiscally responsible as we can for the citizens of Anamosa.
and I think the city council needs to be more aware of the everyday workings when it comes to the money spending. Not saying that we're going to run the show or anything, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 heads, and then counting the department heads, are a lot smarter than one. And I'm not taking the department heads out of that equation, but it'd be 9 heads depending on which departments you're dealing with. But if everybody's thinking about it, somebody's going to come up with something better once in a while. It doesn't, it's just, I think that the city council should be a little more involved in the everyday spending.
Well, I do
in
too.
one way or another.
I do too, because I think at times, I know I've fielded questions of, why are you guys doing this? And it's like, I didn't even know we were doing it or what the cost was. We need to be more involved and kept up to date on more of these activities than we are.
I do agree with that. I think
Maybe even
there should be
presented
some kind of maybe a weekly report or bi-weekly report or something of kind of things that are going on, what the money's being spent. I don't know. Anybody got any ideas out there?
Well, could it even be informal? And when we have get the monthly or whatever department head update, just say, hey, coming down the line the next month, we're going to do some tree trimming. We talked to A, B, and C contractor.
Yeah.
He appears to be the most economical. Probably going to go with them. Just to keep us in the loop with that sort of an example, I guess.
Yeah, something. And let's just say, as far as I'm concerned, I could see this being a very fluid process at first. As we get our feet wet with it, we may start saying, hey, let's do this, let's adjust it here.
I agree. The council, if you stop and look at everybody that's here and the other people, Mayor, Jacob, everybody, all of us have expertise. I'm a businessman. I've been doing it since I was 40 years old. I'll be 70 this year. Galen is really well versed in what the inner workings of the department is. He's worked there. All of us have a certain talent, and we've got a banker. I mean, we've all got something we can add to this that can kind of tighten up the belt a little bit without killing the horse we're putting the saddle on. You know what I'm saying?
So,
We should probably look into a way for that to happen, some kind of a report like deal going on where we can get a little more involved. I know we're not
Yeah.
getting paid very darn much. I saw my paycheck, but I like being involved. That's why I got into this thing. I just don't want to come here and say, yeah, let's do this and let's do that and vote for this and vote for that. Go home and watch TV. I spend a lot of time, my own time, doing things for the city that I'm not getting paid for. Anyway,
If those of you, speaking now would provide me, it doesn't have to be right now, but even in an email later with some of the examples of what you're thinking, I guess my only concern, I obviously want to be fiscally responsible, is kind of what we alluded to earlier with the number of quotes, is how much are we going to tie up our staff in some of this stuff before they can get approval if it's got to go through the city council. And we'll get to the exact authorization limits later, but basically, as it's written up now, anything over $50,000, unless it's a bona fide emergency, would require council approval, but that's in a later section.
It depends on what it is, whether it requires council approval or not, right?
So later in the section, or later in the policy, there's dollar limits for employees based on their rank, I guess, or title, on what they're authorized to approve. So while there are other sections that require different procedures, ultimately anything over $50,000, this policy would require the council to approve before it's purchased.
I personally think that's very high. I mean, in the business I work in, it's board approval is required at a much lower level below
Lower.
that. I mean, even when we buy, a couple computers, our board is still, it's still reviewed and said, hey, we spent a couple $1,000s, so they're at least aware. I mean, there gets to be an approval amount, but I think us only seeing things over 50,000 is too high. I mean,
well, I agree with that, Jeff. I was thinking at least 2,500 is a starting point.
anything over 2,500, even for a department head, gets reviewed by the council. Is that what you're saying?
Yep.
I agree.
Yeah.
I totally agree with that.
Because what we do is, like you, Jeff, anything, we even do $500, we take it to the board. Even though we might have purchased it, we take it to the board for their final approval. So unless it's an emergency, anything can wait a month or 2 weeks to get approval.
Am I understanding you said $2,500?
That is exactly what I said.
I'm just confused. I think just again, and comparing that to your concern with getting 2 quotes for $500 is too much. It seems, I guess, confusing how you would want council approval on anything over 2,500. Just off the top of my head, the number of expenses we have over that amount, that could be a very lengthy section of our meetings.
Let me just say this. I'm looking at this from equipment. I'm not looking at it as far as Jim or Dan buying chemicals on a regular basis. That's going through the expenses. I'm looking at any equipment, whether it be a lawnmower, be it a brand new server that's been sitting in the box for 6 months. Those types of items. That's what I'm looking at, and not, like I said, not sitting there looking at the chemicals. It is for anything brand new, or, and there's an or here, used. If it's a used piece of equipment, I don't expect 3 quotes. I just expect to say, here's my need, here's what I can buy it used for, and we can assess it from there.
Yeah, because I mean, if you look at a department head, I mean, say it's budgeted for, but a department head can go out and spend $10,000 on a piece of equipment and have us not really know about, other than once we see that the check was written for the month and it's already said and done. I mean, I'd like to be a little more in the know, I guess, on that kind of stuff.
I guess listening to the conversations, I think I don't want anybody to read into this. I think what our vision is, from what I'm hearing, I think, is that we need a better understanding of what the city is spending, how the money's being spent, who's spending it, and how much is being spent. But that being said, it's not like the city council is going to sit here and dictate every nickel dime that's going to be spent. It's a question of understanding what's being spent. That we will jump in when we feel that there's a necessity to jump in, but it's not like we're trying to control it. Am I kind of getting that? Is that what we're looking at? I mean, it's not like we're going to be driving the department's heads nuts by standing over their shoulder looking over it, but we want to understand what the city is doing and what is being spent and what they're doing and what they're spending. And generally speaking, I don't think you're going to hear much from the city council unless we think that we see a problem. That's our job, is to find the problems, not control. And I think, Rich, I'm kind of putting words in your mouth, but isn't that kind of what we're looking to do? Not take over like a bunch of invading army or something like that, but to understand, so when something comes up that we have a question about, we can start doing some digging and maybe save some money. Not that we're going to control it all. Am I correct, people?
Right, because honestly, when it comes to the materials of chemicals and whatever for water and wastewater, those guys know that. They work with their vendors, and talking to those guys, they do the best they can to save us money. And I understand we don't need to get in on and look at their service contracts with all those people constantly all the time. But if we're buying equipment for the sake of buying equipment, we need to understand why that equipment needs to be purchased. We need to know, how is it going to be used? Is it going to be utilized? And have some input into that, because who knows, maybe that piece of equipment has no resale value and now we're stuck with it.
Yeah.
Maybe it gets used for 2 years and we're stuck with it.
Yeah, like you and me, Rich, were talking. I mean, in our bank, we would call it, what gets presented to the board, a fixed asset purchase, not, service or materials, but something you're going to have for several years, a fixed asset purchase, that type of thing that you're investing money in. I think those are the type of things we'd like to know about.
I think what we should be doing, our job is to find a balance and work on it that way, and kind of like what I was explaining. And another thing I think we should add into this is, I still think this motor pool idea that I've come up with is a good one. That we could probably eliminate some equipment and not have to buy it, because not all the trucks are being used all the time. Not all the lawnmowers are being used all the time. Why does every department have to have, it's kind of, we end up with a bunch of redundant equipment because of that. I think it's something to look into. I think we should probably think about it. I've been in the military. Most of the stuff they do, I thought was pretty stupid, but this one was a good one. At least when I needed a Jeep, the Jeep was gassed up and everything was fixed and it was ready to go. And we could do that and probably save some money that way too.
Just to clarify, Rich, you're talking
Yes, sir.
about this department head part for purchasing authority to drop it to 2,500 instead of 10,000.
Well, it wouldn't just be department head. It would be all equipment over 2,500. So it's just not department head drop. It's also city administrator drop.
Well, see, they're already required to get 2 quotes from 1,000 to 5,000.
Get 2 quotes, but that also right now they can go out and buy a lawnmower for 9,900.
Yeah, that's what I mean. If it was 2,500, they would have to check with us.
Exactly.
So they still get their 2 bids, but then they, present. We get to review
You
those bids
present them.
before the check gets written.
Exactly.
I think our job is to monitor. So we need more information when it comes to this kind of thing, and only jump in when we feel that there's a problem. I mean, I don't think we're going to be turned into pests by doing it that way. And I think Rich is right. We should have a little more information when it comes to that stuff.
The thing that I'm kind of concerned about is we need to be able to say we've done everything we can to monitor the system. And if somebody says, here's my 2 quotes, they're legitimate quotes, and this is the one I want, if it's reasonable, I've got no problem with that. And they shouldn't have a problem presenting it. But if somebody has a problem of coming in and presenting something, then it makes me wonder why they don't want to get the quotes, why they feel that they are being put upon to produce the quotes and have a discussion about the piece of equipment they're buying. So I really have no problem with a lot of this. I just think it is a way to monitor and show that we are doing everything we can to be fiscally responsible for the citizens.
And it's a matter of trust. Everybody's got to trust everybody and know that we're all doing this on the same team, trying to do the same kind of thing for the same goal.
Yep. And like I said, I think this thing could be kind of a fluid topic as we go through this thing for the first year or so. And maybe after 1 year, we make adjustments to this policy. Yeah. But I don't want to say this thing is going to be written in stone for 10 years.
I have no issue. I mean, I think the policy should be fluid and reviewed, at least annually. But I do have an issue with the 2,500. I just think that's too low, and I think we'll find out rather quickly that it's too much oversight. It's going to drown us out. But
well, if it does, then you can say, "I told you so," and we can change it. I mean, we got to start someplace.
Well, and let me just say this: you've got an exception in here for emergency equipment. If a pump goes down, if a blower goes down, that's an emergency. And there's probably only a few suppliers that can provide that material in a short time frame. So that's an exception. There's the exception to the fact that in my mind, the chemicals and supplies, that's an exception. The only thing I'm looking at this is equipment.
Yeah.
I think we need to say if it's a fixed asset equipment purchase, we need to have a look at it. So we can make exceptions to this and just limit it to fixed assets for right now. And if we feel like we need to expand into other areas, we can do that. Now, do I think for the services of street overlay, for bringing down trees, if it's a non-emergency, I do think we need to have a look at that. Non-emergency services, we need to have a look at.
So Rich, you're proposing to cap out the up above in section 7 to cap it at 2,500, but leave the city administrator emergency purchases of 50,000. Leave that as is. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think that'd be reasonable.
Yeah, I agree.
Can you say that again, Jeff?
Oh, I was just clarifying with Rich. I basically in the above chart, the top dollar amount would be the department head of a limit of $2,500, but leave down below where it says city administrator in emergency situations can authorize. Is it up to 50,000 or may approve expenses in excess of 50,000 in emergency situations?
Yes. I think that would be reasonable.
Particularly if you include fixed assets in your description of purchasing.
What was that, Kay?
That fixed assets would help clarify the purchasing authority.
Yes.
Realistically, I don't think not much would change. The only thing we want to be is a little more aware of what's going on. This kind of forces that to happen. But I think once this starts working, I think that things will probably go along pretty much the way they've been going. It's just a question of us being aware of it. And we're just going to, most of the time I can just see it saying, yeah, that sounds good to me. You know, but once in a while we might come up with something that might be better. I think that with the talent that we've got on this council, we should be a little more involved that way. I don't want to take your job. I don't want your job, Jacob. I think it's a tough one, and
and
a
like
lot of
I
the other
said,
jobs here. But
like I said,
I would like to know what's going on a little more.
Go ahead, Rick.
well, and like I said, if it's a non-emergency piece of equipment, 2 weeks or 3 weeks is not going to make that big of a difference.
I would.
I would agree if we're doing proper planning, you know, that those dollar amounts can get put in front of the council and not have to react inside of a 2-week window for the most part.
Well, if you look at through the amount that this city spends in a year, and it's not all in huge numbers like 300,000 or 400,000. If a dollar here and a dollar there is saved, it adds up by the end of the year. And it's not saying that we may not find a lot, but we might find quite a bit. You never know. It's not going to hurt to get involved a little more. I mean,
Well,
I hate
and
paychecks.
let me also say this. When we do the budget, you know, we're doing that in January, February. By the time we get into the season that this stuff may be purchased, we could be 6, 8, 9 months down the road, and something could change that might be better
Correct.
than what was proposed in the budget that we need to take a look at. You know, things change in a hurry anymore.
So you have those noted revisions in a sense, Jacob?
So I have that 2,500 is where the council would like to review. So I suppose and again, this is fixed assets or equipment, 2,500 would be the limit of the city administrator authority. Would that also be the limit of the department head, or is there a lower amount you'd like to see there? Would you like to change the employee or supervisor dollar amounts?
What feedback did you get back from the employees on the $100 full-time employee amount?
So I did not discuss this with all employees, but discussed it with the department heads, and they seemed okay with it. I wanted to be clear that this was a maximum. This did not provide authority blanket across all departments that employees can spend that much. That it just was a maximum so that department heads couldn't give them a higher authority without first seeking their approval. So the feedback seemed to be okay. Was that, you know, if an employee was going to spend more than that, they had to check with their department head first. But that department heads could set a lower amount for that if they wanted to.
Real quick, Jim from Water has raised his hand. Would you like to hear from him now or in a little bit?
I'd be all right with listening to it now.
Okay, all right. I will unmute you, Jim.
Okay. Hello, council and city clerk. This is Jim Henson from the water plant. Question on that. There are times where I have purchases like on, say for instance, fire hydrants. They run it, I wait till they run a sale on them. And sometimes that is on a timeline. Could that be up to the city administrator to approve that if we run into that situation? That's my question. Thank you.
I would consider that
An emergency.
talking well, or that, or more like supplies, or just things you use, no different than like the chemicals. I mean, I really think it's more the computers, the trucks, the lawnmowers, the trailers, that sort of thing. The big
Right.
fixed items. I would kind of put that in with the chemicals and that. It's, you got to have it to at a minimum to do that.
I think, Jim, that would be kind of one of those things that everybody on the council would agree with. A pattern like that is a smart move on your part. I do the same thing with shop supplies. There's certain times when they have sales and we stock up. You're not going to see us jump in on something like that, I don't think. It's just
Okay.
being
and
aware
just
that
to
I didn't
an-
know you were doing that at the time, and I think that's really good that you're doing that. So,
Well, Jim,
I wouldn't have a problem with that.
Yes.
Jim, how much do each one of those fire hydrants cost each individual one?
On an average, 2,500.
Okay, so you'd be right at your limit per hydrant.
Yeah, and there are also
what's
there
that?
are also there's also a point on how many you can get, and that's the thing I would have to discuss with the city administrator. Where if you get 5, you get how many? And this is what Larry Driscoll used to do prior to me taking over the water plant, and we would keep in stock, just to answer Kay's question. It wouldn't be under an emergency, but if we got them and we had them in stock, should we purchase it at that point? Because they do have a timeline on that sale, and it does save us quite a bit of money.
Well, in a case like that, I would have no problem with it, and I would look at that as though it's 2,500 per hydrant. So you're at your limit, and you could get 5 of them, 6 of them, whatever, because I'm looking at that 2,500 as an individual piece of equipment,
Very good. Thank you.
not an accumulative. You see what I'm saying?
Yes, sir.
That's a good point, Jim.
Thank you.
I knew we'd go into this.
Get over here.
Here, you want to use this?
So I had to replace DO probes last week, and because the probes that I had were acting up, so I made a decision Thursday to spend $4,000 to keep that plant in compliance. Anything deemed control of the plant, pumps, anything necessary to run that plant efficiently, water plant included. That's why you entrust us as water and wastewater superintendents. Now, anything outside that scope, I usually come in to Jacob and we discuss pretty much any purchases. And also during budget times, we budget for a certain amount of equipment or pricing of equipment. And I've even came to you guys and presented that piece of equipment to you after we already approved it within our budget. For clarification, for myself, I think we've pretty much covered all the bases as a department head as far as water, wastewater. Is that, am I clear on that? Am I missing anything there?
I don't think so.
If there's a decision to be made and I don't feel comfortable making that decision, I have the option of calling the mayor or the city manager and saying, hey, this is what I'm up against. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
I don't think that, like I say, I think you're probably reading a little bit into it, because what I'm thinking is we want to be more aware of what's being
Sure.
done. And so if you have something like that you need to be done, we will be aware of it.
Sure.
Generally speaking, I don't see us saying no to any of that stuff.
Okay.
What we're looking for more is kind of I guess you'd call it oversight. Is that right, Rich? Kind of oversight on this? So at least we have
say
some
that
kind
would
of
be
a
fair
handle on it.
assessment. I'd say that's a fair assessment. And, you know, who knows? Maybe after we go through a year, we say, hey, this 2,500 doesn't work. We're going to raise it to 6,000. I mean, I'm ready to be fluid with this thing, but we got to have a starting
Absolutely.
point.
Well, I think we're heading in the right direction. I just want
Yeah.
clarification.
Because
Yeah.
like I said
Thanks.
earlier tonight, the big thing is we have to trust each other. We have to trust that our department heads are doing what they're supposed to, and they have to trust us that we're not going to get in their way, but we're doing what we're supposed to. And I think oversight is a good thing. I've never seen a business that didn't run quite smoothly with the correct type. I must clarify that, the correct type of oversight.
Well, and here's what I would like to see us do is once we get this in place and we go till December with it, we take a step back, we take a look at it, we talk to the department heads, we then analyze it and say what worked, what didn't work,
Yep.
what needs to be adjusted.
Yep.
And I'm not saying, like I said, this isn't going to be in stone for 5 years. This is going to be fluid until we all get on the same page and
Yep.
get in a rhythm. That's the
Tweak
way
it
I
as we
look.
go. We can tweak it as we go.
Yep, that's what I'm looking at this as, hey, we got to have a starting point. This is a starting point.
Well, I'm just going through the budget for this month. And out of this whole budget, there's only three expenditures over $2,500. Most of them were, well under. The other ones are big, downtown facade revitalization, and there was a $6,600 for equipment maintenance on the vacuum truck. But most of it is under 1,000, and the rest of it's mostly just, so I don't think 2,500 is unreasonable.
No, and nobody has to freak out because we're not going to be screaming and yelling because somebody's spending $50 for something. If unless it makes absolutely no sense. What do you mean you want bubble gum? What are you going to be using that for? Plugging holes in the water lines? That kind of thing. It's just oversight. I want to know what's going on. I want to know what's happening.
And I want to make sure we're doing everything we can to be responsible. It's just, like I said, let's start with it. Let's see what happens. Let's review it in December or sometime in that time frame. Figure out what worked, figure out what we need to change, and figure out if something needs to be just dropped. But we got to start somewhere.
I'm asking.
Not yet.
Well, if there's no other questions, I think we jumped from section 5 into section 7. As far as section 6 with competitive bidding, as it is presented, is the council good with that verbiage?
In competitive bidding, the only thing I would say is in section 2, where it says formal bids must be take with the cooperation. I think that word should be taken. Formal bids must be taken with, as opposed to take.
Duly noted.
And the other thing I guess I have a question on is in section 2, number B, a notice to bidders must be published by the city clerk not less than 4 and not more than 45 days. Is that state code?
Yes.
I believe so.
So when it says not less than 4, is that enough time to publish? Or could we go to 10 days or something like that to, if we put it in the paper and say 5 days, we may not really get competitive bids. Or
I
people
would
may not.
be, I think I'd be okay with increasing that. Can't think of a situation. Pretty rarely use this provision. So I think that would be all right. Beth?
If that's generally those dates are set by state code and we have to follow them. So that just means that that's the shortest amount of time you can have and that's the longest amount of time you can. You just have to do it in between those two times.
Well,
So
if
like
that's the case,
with the budget, we had, sorry, go ahead.
well, I was just going to say, if that's the case in that state code, that's fine. But I would like to see us have it in, if at all possible, not less than 30 days in advance. If we could put that in and say that we would strive to have it in not less than 30 days or 15 days, I don't care, but something a little bit longer than 4 days, and set that as our internal time frame. And that's not saying it's got to be held strict, but I would like to see us try to get the ad in or published a little bit further out than just 4 days.
Okay.
Jake, if you want to walk us through the remaining sections.
Do you want me to cover the competitive bidding or are we good on that section?
I think we're good.
I'm good.
Sounds like we're good.
Okay. I'll be, so I want to ask one question real quick on section 7 was, I didn't have a clear answer on what you wanted me to do with the lower dollar amounts for those employee types. Leave them as is or drop those in accordance with the department heads?
I'd just leave them.
How many
That seems like a reasonable amount.
How many department supervisors do we have?
Not too many. We've got a supervisor in the police department, and we've got a couple what I would call supervisors in the parks.
Streets.
Yeah, Streets has one.
So with that being said, do we need to classify somebody, say, in water and wastewater as a supervisor to, Jim or Dan's gone and they need to run out to, I don't know, Tyson's or Menards or something to get some piece of equipment? Do we want to classify as somebody as a lead in those two departments at some point in time?
We could do that.
I know we can't do it tonight, but I think we need to think about it.
One other thing I wanted to bring up that I was just thinking about, I hate to drag this out any farther, but Dan did bring up a good point on the amount of money that you had to spend here just lately. This could cause a snag for him if we don't get the information quick enough, because he may need to do that day or the next day. How do we work around that?
Well, I'm thinking that if it is a time-sensitive purchase type of a deal, maybe we make the exception that with a phone call to the city administrator and the mayor.
Yeah.
Or the mayor pro tem, if the
Right.
mayor's not available, to make that call. If it's time sensitive like that.
Sounds
I
like
think so.
most of what
Yeah.
Dan was talking about is, an essential for his operation there at the plant. I mean, I think pretty much mark this as, just the fixed asset type things that aren't. I can't think of too many situations where there'd be a fixed asset that would be an emergency,
Yeah.
where an emergency purchase would be needed.
Well, this is one of those exceptions where it kind of like with Jim and the fire hydrants. It may not be that it's an emergency because it's going into surplus to be stored, but that window of opportunity to purchase at that low price is a very narrow window. And I think we can make an exception to say, if he calls the city administrator and says, here's my deal, boom, and it gets approved, he goes ahead and buys it. If it's going to be something that is time sensitive and it's $20,000, that might be a different story. But at $2,500, that's one thing.
It's just a question of us having to know that our department heads need to know that we trust them to make the right decisions. And my sense, talking to them over the amount of time that I've been in this job, I think they're doing a good job of doing that. I think what the department heads need to understand is we're not trying to interfere or stop them. We just want to be aware of it. We want oversight. We want to know what they're spending. So we can get this information after the fact. They shouldn't be afraid to have to do something that they know they need to do. So I was just wondering how we would deal with that. But I hope Dan and Jim, if Jim, you're listening, that you understand, at least in my sense of it, is that I'm not trying to take over your job or curtail anything that you're doing, because I know you guys are trying to do the right thing. So it's just a question of us getting information after the fact sometimes. But Rich is right. You're already doing it. You're calling the mayor or Jacob. So the information's there. We just want it too when it becomes available to us. So hopefully you understand we're not trying to trip you up or something like that.
If it's all right, I'll proceed with reviewing the policy at Section 8, the buy local policy.
Please.
So this is kind of the answer to a question that's come up somewhat frequently. When do we give preference to a local business versus another business, when even if the local business may be a little bit more expensive? First, the policy limits us at enforcing this at $1,000 or more. It doesn't mean that we can't use the policy in making decisions for less, but the idea is we don't corner ourselves in, somebody making a quick purchase and not following the policy, and then the business wondering why we didn't follow our policy. So, I mean, that's why that's in there, not because we can't do less, but we don't want to hold ourselves accountable to it. Anything over 1,000, we would kind of check through this policy on. First, local business is defined as either a business owning commercial property and paying taxes for the past year, or renting commercial property who the owner paid property tax for the past year. And we would require those businesses to become certified so that we have a list of who is a local business, just so that we're not responsible, again, for tracking who necessarily moves into the community or out of the community within, a given time. Once somebody is certified, they wouldn't have to do that again. We would review it annually, but they wouldn't have to necessarily certify annually. They just
With the certification, my only concern is, I would think most of the time we'd be aware of a business that would be a good candidate for looking at it. I know it's hard enough to be a small business and to, make a profit. They spend their time and effort trying to run their business. I think having them certify with us is not the best way to do it. For example, if we're looking at buying a truck, I don't think Wayne Hall should have to certify with us. I think it should go without saying that, hey, he would probably like a shot to give us a bid for looking at a truck. I mean, for an example. So,
I have some questions about how you would define a commercial building.
It would be based on what property, what the county classifies their property as. So they're either paying commercial taxes or residential taxes, or industrial. So, I mean, either commercial or industrial taxes would qualify, but somebody working out of their home paying residential tax would not qualify.
So I think there is a vendor that we have frequently used then that wouldn't qualify, because where they built was at the time residential and can't be changed.
Well, we've got several people that, let's say we end up with a local guy who does IT work, but he does most of it out of his house and does not have a commercial business address. I would like to see that section struck from this, talking about commercial buildings and being in city limits, because let's say we want to do higher garbage, and you look at how many of our garbage haulers live outside of city limits.
well, and a lot of them don't have a commercial building. They just have a pull shed at their place outside of town.
Yeah.
And but they are within several miles of the city of Anamosa and consider Anamosa their home.
And
So,
people have an Anamosa address that do work for the city, but live on the bypass, so to speak. Well, they wouldn't qualify then.
I understand where you're coming from. The concern would be, so you may have two businesses, let's say two plumbers, one that is genuinely in the city of Anamosa, the city limits, paying commercial taxes, and another plumber who may have an Anamosa address, may be a part of the community, but they're outside the limits. They're not paying a single dime of taxes to the city. And now you're giving them the same preference. And if that's what you want to do, that's fine. Just want to make that clear that that's what the policy would do.
okay, what would with that scenario, what happens if we have a plumber who lives in town who doesn't have necessarily a commercial address, but maybe works out of his house for the most part? How do you treat that? Yeah, he's paying property taxes.
So again, and if we want to strike the commercial requirement, we can do that. But what I guess the argument for the commercial is that they're paying into the community above and beyond what any normal citizen would be. So I mean, assuming we're all contributing, we have our residents. We pay that tax at a very different rate than the commercial. So the idea is that they're contributing to the community beyond their residential. And again, for that example, we may have people who live outside the community who have located a business here. And again, they would be permitted even, based on your change, but they may feel that them having to pay the commercial tax versus somebody only paying the residential may not be fair, because they're paying substantially more. Why didn't they just buy a cheap house?
Well, I'm sorry, I cannot think of a plumber that has a commercial business within the city limits.
There is, as of recently, there is.
Yes.
Yes, a new one, but then he wouldn't have been certified because he hasn't been paying taxes for a year.
Well,
Yes,
within
correct.
a year.
Correct,
but within a year, he will, within the next
yeah,
year.
within a year he would be. So
Right.
then we would have one to choose from.
And again, that's only giving them the preference. That doesn't mean that they're the only one we choose from. I'll get into the details of what preference they get, but it doesn't mean that they're exclusive.
I don't care for the commercial building definition within
It
section
still all
8.
goes back to who gives the best bid or does the best price for the product or the
Well,
service.
I think it's a combination of best service, best price, because we can always get the best price from somebody, but the service is bad. Or we can get a high price and the service is great. I think it takes into more than just one factor here.
I think at the core, what we're kind of the most perfect example would be, you know, we're buying a new police vehicle, and Jeremiah's got a bid from a Ford Explorer from Freeze in Monticello or a Dodge Durango in Wayne Hall. You know, so if Wayne's just a very small fraction higher, we go with him. One, because he's paying Anamosa taxes, and two, because the service. I mean, I think that's what we're. If I'm reading what everyone's thinking, that'd be the best example of what we're getting at.
Yeah, and I don't think we need the definition to state that, because I think we know who we're dealing with.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
You know,
Exactly.
The consensus that I am hearing is that the definition should be limited to businesses located within the city limits. And there shouldn't be any commercial language. Does that sound right?
I would be
I would,
okay with just striking commercial buildings.
me too.
Could we have a second one that, you know, preference was within the city limits, but, you know, secondary would be, you know, rural outside, you know, I don't know, would you rather give business to, you know, a rural Anamosa or a, you know, in-town Monticello? You know, I think we'd still rather see it go to a rural Anamosa business.
I would agree with that.
I would agree.
Can we live with, under section 8, paragraphs A and B, only strike the word commercial from both of those?
Yeah,
Well,
I would
and,
strike.
and maybe
and then I
say
would-
city of Anamosa and close and surrounding area, or area
Again,
close.
I would do a C.
going back to what Jacob said, all this is about the preference side.
Yeah, but I would do a C and say businesses that reside with an Anamosa address
Yeah.
That would
in
work.
within the county. That gives us another layer of a local business.
That still puts them competing with the businesses that are paying taxes.
Well, that doesn't mean that we can do a C just to put them there as maybe third in line. Because if we don't do that, then like Jeff was saying, if we've got somebody who's outside, just outside city limits, that puts them on the same level as a business from Monticello. I would like to see them have a little bit step up as far as a local business. Then, you know, we could go rank them in order. Within city limits, with the outside city limits, but with an Anamosa address.
Trying to, I guess, address your concern. It does make sense. What if the language was, you know, if there is no local business under the definition above, then we can expand the definition to, you know, like a 2-mile radius, so that we'd only be invoking that if we didn't have a, you know, qualifying business within the city limits. Or
Well, do you want to go just the 2-mile limit or just an Anamosa address? Because
we could do an Anamosa
um,
address. I don't know how far those go, but that's fine with me. I just think it's important that only come into effect if we don't actually have that type of business located within the city.
Yeah, that's why I said let's rank them. You know, within city limits would be 1, 2 would be Anamosa address in the county.
And commercial building will be stricken from both, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
Striking commercial building or just the word commercial?
Well, it'd be commercial building. I mean, you could say, paying,
Residential could be considered a building.
Building may be important because again, then the person would only have to own an empty lot in town.
okay, so let's leave building and strike commercial.
Fair enough.
yep, that'll work.
Sounds good.
Okay,
So I heard from at least Jeff that they didn't want it to be certified. Again, I think that takes a little bit of responsibility off us, but was there consensus to remove that requirement?
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, do they need to, I don't know, if we're getting proposals every time on, like on some of this stuff, if we're getting proposals and we're going through all this, why can't they at that point in time just attach a little statement that says we work out of 102 East Main Street or something? It just gives us an address, and at that point in time when they're doing their proposals, they're giving us exactly where their building is. So they don't have to do it on an annual basis.
Well, I guess the certification process, I feel a little bit more strongly about if we're going to include residential, because it could easily, a plumber could easily move into the community and work from their home without us knowing. And now they're wondering, why they weren't considered local. I guess you're right. They could submit something with their bid, but I'm just nervous we could end up again, with a business wondering why they weren't given the preference described here, and we would be, how we didn't know.
Well, okay, let's say they did move down. How are they going to know that they need to certify? Are we going to put it on a website? We're going to put an application out there, or what are we going to do to let them know that they need to do this process?
I think we would definitely have it on our website, and obviously we could advertise it initially, but ongoing basis, it would kind of have to be educated.
I just feel like it's not something that the average person, even that's been in business for a long time, is going to think to ask about or know about.
I guess on the one hand, it's not going to be, I guess, much different than what we do with the garbage haulers every year. But at least on the onset, we need to educate and let people know what this process really entails.
Okay, yeah, I agree. And to clarify, I don't think we wouldn't require every business to certify every year. We internally would review our list to make sure it's still accurate, and if we think somebody moved out or whatever. But once they become certified, I think they would be good until we think otherwise, and we'd look into that.
And a good resource, if we're questioning, are we missing somebody, talking to like the Chamber of Commerce or something like that too. They're a lot of times pretty aware of things like that. New businesses.
I think the chamber would be a great resource to get the information out. We can pass any required documentation along to them, and they can get it to their membership, and I think that'd be really effective.
Okay.
So there are some exempt purchases, things anytime we're required by federal or state law or grant requirements. These this specific policy wouldn't apply. Anything that's a sole source purchase, for example, the fire hydrants, we buy a very specific type of fire hydrant to be consistent. So just in case a local fire hydrant company occurs, they wouldn't necessarily qualify. And regular ongoing service relationships, like we discussed, engineering, or in certain situations, electrical. Just because we, for those regular ongoing types of services, they wouldn't apply. Chemical purchases, anything that's more special, more irregular. And then the preference limitations. So we have different dollar thresholds to not give too much preference, but smaller purchases, $2,999 or less, up to 20% preference. $3,000 to $25,000, 10%. And all that means is that if our lowest bid is lower, but the local businesses within that percentage amount, then we can treat them as at least equal on the cost side of things. That doesn't necessarily mean that we're locked in to the local business. If there was a really good reason why we didn't, either didn't trust the local business or there was a much better benefit to going with the outside business, we could, but they're at least equal terms for monetary purposes. And then the next two tiers, the 25,000 to 199,000, 5%, and 200,000 or more, 1%. And again, those top two tiers are pretty rare. Well, at least the top tier, it'd be more capital projects type things, but that's the buy local policy. Any other questions or concerns? If not, we'll go into section 9, conflict of interest. Most of this follows state code. Basically, the gist of it is we shouldn't not spend public funds in a way that benefits any city employee or city official, substantially different than the general public. That includes relatives of the employer official, and those specific relations are defined in the bottom of that second paragraph. While generally there should never be a benefit, state code does allow for certain expenses within this conflict up to $6,000 per fiscal year. Situations, I believe what got this amount changed, it used to be much lower, but it got increased up to 6,000. There was a town where the only local hardware store, again, had a conflict of interest, but they lobbied and the state saw a reason where, yes, there was the conflict, but it only made sense to buy from this local hardware store. So they increased the dollar amount up to 6,000. But generally, we should try to avoid spending any money that would be a conflict. And I guess I should add, anytime there is a conflict, even if it does eventually get approved, that the person who has the conflict should remove themselves from that decision. So any other questions on that section? That's the policy. I guess we can do this however you want. I can make revisions and we can approve it next meeting, or I think I have a pretty good understanding of the revisions. If you wanted to approve it with those revisions in place, however you want to proceed.
Well, there is one other thing, I guess I would like to add. As far as your number 2, general purchasing procedures, you've got A, B, C, D, E for lead time, warranty, functionality, product quality, overall price. I would also like to see maybe an F that would say something to response time for repairs, maintenance. You know, I'm going to use this as an example. Look, in talking with Beth about the new accounting software, she said there's one company that their response time is not as good as another one. So I think that something like that should be taken into consideration.
Would customer service sum that up?
Customer
If I
service
added
maybe,
F, customer service.
or even the, let's say it's a piece of equipment that we need to have maintained. What type of maintenance department do they have that possibly could respond? So customer service, something to that nature, yes.
Okay.
And I also, at some place in here, like to just say that if it's a used piece of equipment, I don't think we need to require 3 bids, because getting 3 bids for a piece of used equipment is, you're not going to get an apples to apples comparison.
I guess I can add some language. My feeling is that if you're going to buy used, maybe you don't require a comparable used equipment, because you're right, it becomes much harder to get a true equal comparison. But I think it is worthwhile to look and compare it to the new piece of equipment. In a lot of situations, there is benefit because of government incentives for us to consider new, but not all the time. And so I guess I don't want to tell people to just buy used because you can override the requirements, but they should be at least considering it compared to what the new is, and make sure that used is in fact a good decision.
Good point.
Well, I think you can get, you know, we can get their quote for the used piece of equipment, but along with that, there are used guides out there that we could utilize to say, is this a good enough deal? Is it reasonable? Or is this piece of equipment overpriced and we should stay away from it? So maybe we need to also look at, you know, if it's a used pickup, we can go to the NADA book. If it's a used tractor, we can go to Tractor Warehouse or someplace like that and compare prices. So maybe we need to put that in there someplace and incorporate it.
All right, I'll work on a used equipment section.
But I will say, I think this was an excellent start.
Thank you.
Being we are actually talking about a policy, I would prefer that the modifications and revisions be made and then represented to the council for approval. Again, I base that because it is a policy that we would be looking to adopt and implement.
Make a motion to.
You want a motion to table this until?
Yes, please.
I'll make a motion to table this item until a revised purchase policy can be resubmitted.
Second.
We have a motion by Rich, second by Alan for Jacob to bring back the purchasing policy with revisions and modifications, preferably at the next meeting, Jacob. Any further discussion on that action? Rebecca, are you seeing any inquiries from the public regarding the policy?
I do not at this time.
Zumba,
Yes.
Stout,
Yes.
Capron,
Yes.
Crump,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Lockhart.
Yes.
Is that everybody?
Yep.
I count 5. So the motion to table 8.1 was unanimous. 8.2, authorization to submit fiscal year 2021 annual budget.
So moved.
I believe I heard a motion by Kay and second by John to authorize the budget. Any further discussion? Any comment from the public?
Not that I see.
Stout,
Yes.
Capron,
Yes.
Crump,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Lockhart,
Yes.
Zumba.
Yes.
Motion to approve the annual budget was unanimous. 8.3, discussion and possible action on drinking water well project.
I'm just, I sent out an email just as the meeting was starting. I'd gotten some new information from Andrew Marshall, gave a little bit better summary of what we'll be discussing. If you're able to access your email to look at that, that'd be helpful. I'm not sure if I'm able, I'm not currently connected on my laptop to the call. Rebecca, do you think I'd be able to share my screen, or is that only going to be done by you?
I think I think I have it locked down to just me at the moment.
Okay, that's what I thought. So I guess if you're able to view it in your email, great. If not, I can kind of read through it. But otherwise, I'll let Andrew Marsh, who should be on the call, kind of go over.
Can you hear me?
things.
Yes.
Yes, I believe we can.
Beautiful. Rebecca, I can share my screen if you'd like, and I have that figure available.
Let me see if I can figure out how to do that.
Sure.
Could you please
So
state your
let me
name?
first start by introducing myself. This is Andrew Marsh. I'm a principal at HR Green. We're an engineering consulting services company headquartered in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. We have 17 offices with over 500 employees across the United States. And HR Green has helped the city of Anamosa with numerous water projects over the last several years, including the newer water tower on the east side of town, as well as the water treatment plant expansion here in the last few years. I wanted to get everyone up to speed and updated on the wells this evening, and I appreciate everybody allowing me a few minutes to talk. I'll try to be brief, and please stop me if you have questions. The water treatment plant is served by 2 wells currently, and one of those wells is called well number 4, and it's just as you enter the water treatment plant. It's that small stone building on the left-hand side of the driveway as you enter into the water plant. And the other well is down the hill, down on Liberty Street. That's well number 5. And well number 4 was built in 1969. And well number 5 was built in 1990. And the reason that HR Green has gotten involved with the wells is we've been talking about updating the wells. You know, when wells are new, their design life is in the neighborhood of 40 to 50 years. And right now, well 4, the older of the two wells, is 51 years old. So we're already just past the design life of those wells. And unfortunately, we're not able to just drill another well next to well 4 and have a new well there. The reason being is that in the last several years, DNR passed a law that requires 200 feet of legal control around new wells. And the reason for that 200 feet of legal control around new wells is to have the ability for the city to regulate and control what land uses are within that 200 feet. If you can imagine, you would hate to put a new well in and then have, for example, a worst case scenario would be to have like a confined animal operation within 200 feet of the well. That would be a pretty obvious source of potential contamination and a risk that the city would not want to take with such a large investment as a drinking water well. So that 200 feet of legal control is intended to have a benefit to the city of controlling the land use and controlling the water quality for a future well. So again, the problem is that the wells that you have served the city very, very well for a long time, provided great quality water, but they're like a lot of other aging infrastructure, they're in need of update and replacement. And well 4 is the well that we would like to replace. And the challenge is to find a site that has 200 feet of legal control available that we can locate the new well. So the city hired HR Green a couple years ago to do a small study, and we looked at 4 locations. And Rebecca, I don't know if you were able to share the screen or not.
I think I've turned it on for you if
Okay.
you want to try that.
All right. Can everybody see that aerial photo?
Yes,
Yes.
thank you.
Yep.
Wonderful. Very good. So we looked at these 4 sites, and I'll go through each one of them very briefly, and if anybody has any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. So site number 1 is just immediately west of the water treatment plant, and it's on private property, and it has advantages and disadvantages, just like each of the well sites. One advantage is that it's very, very close. You can't get much closer than site 1 because it's due west. It's also open space that's not easily developable because it's a bit of a ravine. And I'm not saying that you couldn't develop it, but you certainly could. But it is available, and it has some challenging topography. That's why it hasn't been developed yet. Another disadvantage of that site, or consideration of that site, is there is a gas main that runs north-south that we need to be sure to miss if we do any future work on that site. Site 2 is located within Remley Woods City Park, just across the street and down a little from the water treatment plant. One of the reasons we looked at that site is because it was already city-owned property. So that's a big advantage to that site. disadvantage is that there are a lot of very mature, beautiful trees on that site, and it would be a challenge to locate a well within 200 feet of legal control without damaging some pretty nice trees. Another challenge would be that the further you get away from the roadway and put a road in, the more you have to contend with the topography as that hillside kind of drops off. Site 3 is just to the north of the water plant, and this is the closest site. But a big disadvantage of that, Site 3, is that you can't fit that 200 feet of legal control in just one parcel, and there would have to be multiple parcels to be able to make that work to get the 200 feet of legal control. So even though it's close, it would take multiple parcels. Site 4 is down in the corner of the commercial development park. And again, it is a city-owned parcel, so that's an advantage. Disadvantage is the pipe that is required to pipe that all the way back to a water treatment plant is by far and away the longest pipe to get it back up the hill. And it also, it does not, the 200 feet of legal control would require more than one parcel to be purchased. And the city only owns that one corner lot, so you would actually have to purchase more lots. And there would also be a little bit of easement required to run the pipe back up to the water plant. So this is by far and away the most expensive option for the new well location. So with all of these pros and cons and costs of each of these sites, the city staff and I really focused in on site number 1, which is the first one that I talked about, just west of the water plant. Again, it has advantages and disadvantages. It's very close to the water plant, which is great. Disadvantages, it has that gas main to contend with, and it has a little bit of a ditch through the middle of it that has to be contended with as well. The other disadvantage is that the city does not own this property. It's private property. So we have had a few discussions with the Keeney family, and in those initial discussions, they did express some interest in either leasing or selling that part of their property. And so based on those conversations, we went ahead with a couple of other steps. First was a survey. We hired a professional surveyor to come out and survey that lot to see what the boundaries would be of the parcel that we needed to buy to fit that 200 feet of legal control. And secondly, we hired an appraiser to come out, and they were a licensed appraisal company. We used Cook Appraisal out of Iowa City, and they were chosen because they were acceptable to both the city and to the Keeney family that owns the parcel right now. And we had an appraisal done of that property. And based on that, Jacob recently met with Mr. Keeney and shared the results of the appraisal with the Keeney family in a desire to, again, either lease or purchase the property for a future well to go on the site of Site 1. Unfortunately, the tentative discussions were not fruitful, and I think Jacob can speak to this more than I can, but I think the bottom line is that the Keeney family has a higher number in mind for either leasing or purchasing that property than what the appraiser's opinion was. And so part of my objective tonight with this discussion is, number one, give everyone an update on all of the planning process that we've gone through with regard to siting a future well. Number two, allow everyone an opportunity to ask as many questions as you have. And number three, I would like to entertain the idea of perhaps we could offer the Keeney family slightly more than what the appraiser came up with for their opinion of the property value. Because in the long run, I think there would still be, even if we paid a slight premium for that parcel, it would still be less expensive overall when you consider the additional costs with the other locations. In addition to that, one of the things that I haven't mentioned yet is this Remley Woods City Park. Jacob tracked down the original deed from when the city received the Remley Woods property. And in that deed, there were restrictions placed upon that land. And for the first 30 years, restricted in taking any trees down. And that time has since lapsed. That started in, you can see the deed here, that started in 1979. So that deed is no longer enforced. But I think it is safe to say that if we went bulldozing a bunch of very nice trees in that park, that is not in keeping with the intent of the deed, even though it has sunsetted out. So my personal preference would be to stay away from the Remley Woods site for that reason, and for the reason that it's more expensive to pipe the water back to the water plant. My personal preference and recommendation would be, after everyone's questions are answered and addressed, to authorize Jacob and myself to have another conversation with Mr. Keeney and see if there isn't a more favorable offer that we can make on the property and yet still save money overall in comparison to the costs that would be incurred if we pursued the other sites. Again, my preference is site one. So that's kind of where we're at overall with the history of the well locations, and I would open it up to any questions from any of the council members at this time.
Well, I do have a question
Sure.
to start with. Where does the line run from well number 5 up to the water treatment plant? Where does that run at?
Sure. Hold on one second. I'll pull that up. Can everybody see my screen still?
Yep.
Yes.
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 This is well 5. This is on Liberty Street. That's an aerial view. And the pipe from well 5 goes, I don't have the exact route as maybe Jim does, but it basically goes up the hill through Remley Woods, and then crosses over the Knoll Street and then into the water plant. So it starts here and goes up through the woods and into the water plant.
So would there be a way, instead of running a whole new line from site 2, to tie into that line? And so you didn't have to lay a whole new line?
Great question. I love that question. I love where your head is at. So the answer might surprise you, though. I'm going to say quite simply no. And the reason why is I would like for both wells to be independent of each other, so that if you had a leak or a failure of the pipe going from, say, well 5 to the water plant, if any part of that pipe failed, I wouldn't want it to take out both wells. In other words, I want full redundancy on the water supply. Does that make sense?
Okay.
And that redundancy, that level of redundancy is what the DNR would require for a new well, so that you have source water redundancy.
Okay.
So probably not the answer you expected, but there is a reason for it.
No, just got to look at all angles.
Yep. Great question, though.
Site 3, where you have multiple parcels. What's the complication with the multiple parcels? Are there certain owners that may complicate the possibility of making that happen?
1 and 3 are the same owner.
Yeah.
Correct. So the Keeney family house sits right under that Site 3 label right there. And basically, you'd be taking a good chunk of his whole property under that scenario. And he just made some significant improvements to that house, and he has no intention of selling either of these parcels. So that Site 3 is a challenge, because he has in the conversations that we've had with Mr. Keeney, he has no desire to sell this lot here. He would much rather lease or sell Site 1 instead.
Site 1, what do you think it's going to take to get that property?
Good question. Honestly, I don't have a number in mind.
What was the
I
offer?
think
I want
that,
to refrain from discussing exact offers. I think so. I wanted to update the council and everybody on this. Assuming that we got consensus support for that site, we could discuss specific offers in a closed session at our next meeting. But to answer your question, I guess we offered what the appraisal amount was, and I feel comfortable talking about the appraisal amount. Andrew, do you remember what that was off the top of your head? I don't. I can pull it up though.
so the offer was, the appraisal offer was $48,000 if the lot was purchased outright.
Yep.
And $3,600 a year if it was leased. The reason we got the appraisal for both a lease or a purchase is because in the conversations that we've had with the Keeney family, they expressed a preference for a long-term lease. And by long-term, I mean in the 50-year range, 50 to 60 years was discussed. I don't remember the exact details, but I think he has inherited that property, and it's run in the family a long time. So I believe in the conversation that I had with Mr. Keeney, he expressed a preference for lease. I know that the city would, I believe the city would probably prefer to just purchase it outright. From my perspective, I don't care which one we do, as long as we have an opportunity to put a well on the property. And I think whether it's leased or purchased, the Keeney family is open to a well on that property, because it has very little disruption to, it would stay a field basically long term. It's just, there'd be just a well in the middle of it, which is not much of an obstruction.
Okay.
My discussions with Mr. Keeney is he would much prefer a lease, but I think there are a lot of reasons why the city should really try to purchase the property if at all possible. The immediate need is for the well, but there are a lot of other long-term needs, some that we can see, some that we can't, that we may need with the water treatment plant. And being that it's adjacent to the treatment plant, I just think that it justifies truly purchasing the property.
Yeah.
I guess we can discuss that further. Really what I'm looking for is a consensus to have that discussion about purchasing and pricing and offers at a future meeting. That's where I'm at.
Here's a thought. We could purchase it and offer, and 50 years from now, it's going to be worth way more money than what we'd be purchasing it now, but we could offer to sell it back to them the same price we bought it for once the well's used up its usefulness.
Right of first refusal, put that in there.
We could do a right of first refusal. I wouldn't want to put in there specifically that we would resell it at a certain time, just because, again, there may be other purposes that come along. You know, we just expanded the plant. Who knows when the next expansion will need to occur? I mean, we've scheduled out quite a ways, but it could easily be within this 50-year time frame. And there are other, projects that we've discussed that could benefit from the property. So for those reasons, I think purchasing is the right direction.
I agree.
I mean, if it comes down to purchasing it versus leasing it, I mean, you've got room. You'd be better off, increasing the purchase price, because if you look at where we're at, over the annual lease that he's looking at, that money only buys you 13 years. So I don't know if he's wanting a 50, 60-year lease. I think in the long run, we'd be better at looking at maybe spending a little bit more on the purchase price.
So if everybody is on board, we would like to number one, if we need to have further discussion on the exact dollar figures, like Jacob said, I'd recommend doing that in closed session. And number two, we'd like to get consensus on pursuing Site 1 with Mr. Keeney and his family a little bit further, to see if we can't come to some agreement.
It appears to me to be sensible to pursue working with the Keeneys on Site 1.
I agree.
I agree with that.
I agree.
To move forward with permission from the council, or permitting of the council, to have you do further negotiation with the Keeney family. Is it necessary to have that in the form of a motion, or just in the direction?
I don't think we require a motion because, I mean, we'll make contact with the Keeneys, but I don't plan to make any additional offers until we've had further discussion. So we'll kind of let them know the general direction we're going, that we're going to be meeting in closed session, but I don't plan to make an offer until we've had an opportunity to discuss in closed session the pricing.
I wasn't referring to any type of offer, just to further have the discussions.
I don't think we require a motion.
Can you state how much difference price-wise between the sites?
Yes.
Just in construction costs, I'm talking about.
Oh.
Yes. On my screen now is the piping only costs between the different well sites. just for piping to well site 1, we're in the neighborhood of $75,000. Just for piping for well site 2, you're in the $154,000 range. Well site 3, you recall that's the closest one that's just to the north, where the property boundary is the problem. That one's the closest, so that's the least expensive piping. That's only about $52,000 worth of piping. Well site 4, that's the one that you have to go all the way to the industrial park and you need some easement. That one's in the neighborhood of $480,000.
Thank
You
you.
can see the order of magnitude that we're working with here.
Is there general consensus from the council then to have further discussion with the Keeney family?
I would agree with that.
Yes,
Yes.
Yeah, I think so.
Yep, yes.
I didn't hear of any objections, so I will take that as the council is giving the blessing for the further discussion to possibly purchase, if not negotiate in terms of what the duration of a lease could be, and then report.
Sure. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate everyone's time tonight again, and just let me know if anyone has any further questions.
Thank you, Andrew.
You bet.
Can you give the ball back to Rebecca before you exit?
You bet. Thank you, Rebecca.
You're welcome.
I'm going to sign out. Have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you, you too.
thank you.
I'm going to move to agenda item 8.4, purchase agreement in the amount of $39,950 for water department service truck.
I have some questions.
I guess is Jim available to answer questions? I can try to answer as well.
I have unmuted Jim if he's available.
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, I don't know what a 4x4 box is. Isn't that what it says?
I'm looking at my paperwork right now, okay. That's our, if that means the toolboxing on the back, what is the cost on it?
Well, now I can't even remember where I read it. Oh, a 4x4 long box. I don't know what that is.
It's the size of the back of the box. It's a long box instead of a short box versus, two different sizes.
So is it 6 foot, 4 foot? How many feet is it?
This one is 8.
Okay. And you need a 4-door truck because?
It was a good option that was on there. We do find ourselves going to schools and coming back and carrying extra people. Also, we carry which is very cumbersome, the meter equipment. That would be a lot easier to install in this truck so that we could tote it around and do meters each month. And carrying just some critical equipment inside the truck instead of outside of the truck versus like locators and so on and so forth.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. it was actually the best bang for the buck there because it was an option there that looked like it wasn't going to damage our price on it. And so I decided to go with that size instead. It's the size of a truck like Rich wanted. When we started off with the F-150, was that a truck that we could call a good truck to do the things that we need to do? And I told him no. I said if we did anything, it'd at least be a 3/4 ton so that we could carry, if we have to tow the skid loader, shoring, dig trailer, and so on and so forth there.
Any further questions for Jim? Well, Jim, I know the council tonight is had a little bit of talk on used equipment. And also in the past, we've had those discussions. Have you searched to see if there's any used trucks out there that are available?
Yes, sir. At the beginning we did, and I brought that up in our budget meeting. I did look over to see, and I've done this numerous times over at Wayne Hall, and we find ourselves in a position with even a decent truck brings us to a real close price of a state bid truck. So it just, even having the discussions with Jacob, we've looked at prices back and forth and just saw that this is the best bang for our buck again. So yes, I did. It was mostly at Wayne Hall, and that was about it.
And them don't have the service body, correct?
Correct. Yeah, that has nothing that this has. This is, if you were to price this out of state bid, I'm sure it's 60, 70, maybe $75,000 truck. I've never got the price of what it costs out of state bid.
Remind me, is this a replacement truck or an addition truck?
This is a replacement truck, Kay, a replacement of the Ford F-150 the 05.
Thank you.
You bet.
What's happening to that truck?
It's gotten so bad. It's right now it's power steering. I'm getting complaints of power steering's going bad. I got in it the other day to check it, and it is squealing. It's rusting out real bad. There's just, the seat's gone in it. The driver's seat is just history. I was going to replace that at a couple of years ago, and I couldn't even find a seat that would fit it. They're very hard to find at a junkyard.
Just for everybody's information, I was up at the plant here earlier this year, and I took a look at the truck, and Jim had asked me to give him an idea of what I thought of it. And my first impression after going over it was, I told him that it really wasn't worth spending the money to fix it. It was really beginning to deteriorate. The body was rotting out, and being in the automotive business myself, I'm not a dealer or anything like that, but I do buy and sell cars once in a while. We've got a dealer's license. I've never seen one like this set up the way it's set up with the motor and everything in it for a price like this. I think it's a pretty good deal in my own opinion. You wouldn't buy a used truck for much less than this. And then you'd have to get it set up with the box and everything.
Yeah, just to clue you guys in on Wayne Hall, I did go through them and I got and Jacob has it. There's a paper that came out just with the straight vehicle and not having the box on the back was right. I think Jacob was at 41,000.
Yes, it was.
Thank you.
I'm seeing the right number. It looks like 41,839.
Correct.
No, that's not the. Sorry. Looks like 43,831.
Okay. Thank you. And that was that's a straight truck. That's without the box. So that would, and I didn't get anything back with him. And I don't believe I never got an answer on whether they did a straight bid or not. So it's, that's where it narrowed it down to Pat McGrath or Talkie.
What's a box like that cost?
This particular box was at 9,000,
Okay.
I believe, if I'm correct on that. I could be off on that. I'm trying to look for it, but I think I'm pretty close to that figure.
Any further discussion? What course of action is the council looking to take?
I'll move to purchase.
I'll second.
Motion by Galen, second by Allen, to purchase the truck 3995 from McGrath Fleet Center. Does the council need to have any further discussion?
I want to add that I'm having reservations about it though too.
Noted Galen's having reservations about it. Rebecca, can you see if any of the public has comment?
I do not see anything at this time.
All right. Beth?
Capron,
Yes.
Crump,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Lockhart,
Yes.
Zumba,
Yes.
Stout.
Yes.
Motion to purchase the service truck was unanimous. 8.5, discussion and possible action on elected official training and manual.
We had discussed this in the past, and I was hoping to do kind of a full day training type thing with the elected officials, travel to various departments, as well as spend substantial time with the city attorney who has done these trainings with other clients in the past. What I had envisioned is not realistic at this time, and I don't want to keep delaying the training. I would like to move forward with the city attorney portion of that training and do it via Zoom like we're conducting this meeting now. If that is, doable for the council, and we can postpone the other part for a later date. But
Do you have a date in mind?
I don't.
Do you have, like how long he thinks it would take? Like, is it going to be 2 hours?
I would guess it's going to be 2 to 3 hours. No more than 4.
Jeez. Okay.
We can break it up too. We discussed that it doesn't have to be in one day. He's got a variety of topics that he would like to cover. It could be, over a couple days, or we could tag on, I don't think it's the best, but we could tag it on to meetings. I think that would just make them too long. So I think it'd be best if we had a couple separate days, and maybe even if we did a couple 90-minute sessions.
Yeah, we're at 3 hours now. I don't think it's a good idea to probably tack it on.
I would agree.
Yeah.
I would agree.
And I'd be in favor of breaking it up into 2 to 3 sessions.
If that's a good, I'll get some ideas for dates and email it out, and we can either figure out dates or set those at our next meeting.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Sounds good. Yeah, table this one. 8.6, resolution authorizing notice of building sewer violation.
So we were made aware of sewer connection that's referred to as piggybacking, where we have 2 private sewer mains tied in together. Specifically, we've got one line running through another residential basement. This is not permitted by our code, but it does require action by the council. I had actually already sent a notice out, and it was complied with everything in the code, other than the fact that it has to be authorized by the council. So that's why we've got this resolution before you tonight. We did discuss, the city attorney and I, that this probably isn't the best requirement to have the council required, but I guess if you guys agreed with that, we could look at drawing up an ordinance to change that for the future, but that's kind of a separate topic. I guess first would be approval of the resolution, or if you have any other questions about it, it would just require that they separate that. Really, in essence, it's requiring the property owner at 402 North Williams to have their own connection to the sewer main.
Well, let me ask you something on that. Is it realistic for them to do that within 30 days with their location?
So I don't think that's super realistic. I mean, it could be done, but I think it would be reasonable to give more time. And in fact, my letter gave 60 days, but that letter's kind of void at this point. We would provide a new notice. The 30 days is written into our code. I don't see why we couldn't provide more, but that's kind of the minimum.
Because I'm just looking at where they're located, and there's no sewer line on North Williams in front of their house. So where and how are they going to go without tearing up, I don't know, a portion of the street, a sidewalk, right away? We need to be careful of this. They've got to do it, don't get me wrong, but I don't want it to be rushed to the point where we're all of a sudden we've got another issue.
I agree. Hopefully they can bore it, but it is kind of a difficult connection. So I would not be opposed to giving more than 30 days.
Would you agree to 90?
90 would work if they can get it done.
Where do they have to go?
They're going to have to connect to the manhole that is at the intersection of Williams and Pine Street, which is right at 150 feet from their property, which is the maximum length required or allowed for a building sewer. Now, there's probably others that are longer than that, but that's what the code defines as the maximum for a conforming building sewer is 150 feet. And that manhole is right at that distance.
Will that entail tearing up anything like the street or sidewalks?
Hopefully they can bore it, but it's possible they might have to dig.
Alan, if you're not familiar with where this is at, they sit above street level. And North Williams in that block does not have a sewer line, but the houses across the street from them, if I understand this right, they run to the east through other people's property. Is that correct?
That sounds correct, but I can't confirm that 100%. There is not one on Williams Street, which is probably why they originally set this up the way it is. But they do have the option now to connect to that manhole at Pine and Williams because there's a line running down Pine. It just stops there at the intersection with Williams for whatever reason.
So to do this, are they going to have to? They're either going to have to go up through William Street, break that up, break up the alley, or go through the adjacent property to the north. I mean, do you foresee which option they're going to do?
The only option they have without crossing another property is the intersection of Pine and Williams.
I mean,
any other direction, they're going to have to go through other private property.
So they're going to break up the street, or what?
If they can't bore it, yes, they'll have to break up the street, but hopefully they can bore.
That's a.
So 90 days really might not be enough if we need to have, or they need to have some type of a plan to get this accomplished.
I guess my advice would be to stick with the 90, and if they need more time, let them come back and request that, show the good faith. But that's just my feeling.
Okay.
Well, they ought to be able to have a plan in 90 days and know whether it's going to be enough time, and if not, come back and ask for more.
What have they accomplished to this point since you wrote a letter?
They haven't done anything other than contact their attorney, so it might go that direction. And our city attorney is aware of it, but there really wasn't any need to pursue that until the council had taken official action.
Okay. Well, with that being said, then I guess I'll make a motion to approve this resolution with the change from 30 days to 90 days.
Second.
We have a motion by Rich, second by John, to approve the resolution as submitted with correction of or revision of 30 day to 90 days. Any further discussion from the council on that motion? Any public comment?
I don't see any at the moment.
Zumba,
Yes.
Lockhart,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Crump,
Yes.
Capron,
Yes.
Stout,
Yes.
Motion to approve resolution was unanimous. 8.7, beer and liquor licenses. Section A, renewal of Class C liquor license with Sunday sales privileges, Hot Shots Bar and Grill.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Kay, second by Rich. Any further discussion?
Smith,
Yes.
Lockhart,
Yes.
Zumba,
Yes.
Stout,
Yes.
Capron,
Yes.
Crump,
Yes.
Motion to approve liquor license carried unanimously. 8.8, review and approval of current bills.
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion by Rich, second by John. Any further discussion? Any public comment?
Crump,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Lockhart,
Yes.
Capron,
Yes.
Stout,
Yes.
Zumba.
Yes.
Motion to approve the bills carried unanimously. 9.0, city administrators report.
First, regarding the downtown revitalization project, we've completed all of our property owner meetings. We've got all of our project estimates back. So far, everybody's still interested. We haven't had anybody, drop out. So we had 22 buildings, which we can't afford to do all in one cycle. So we had to make a decision on the best way to move forward. After reviewing the properties, we decided that the best way to divide them up was north and south along Main Street, and that the south side of Main would be in the first cycle, and we'd address the north side in the second cycle. It came down to, where we had some conflicts on the north side, either conflicting grant programs or property owners that wanted to do some work on their own that wouldn't be permitted under the grant, as well as the majority of higher need properties were on the south. So we thought we would get those addressed first. So we certainly hope to do more than one cycle of this and get everybody who's interested taken care of. But we decided on the south side to include in the grant, and we're continuing to work on that with ECOG. Again, we will have some action items coming up. Eventually, we're still getting those hammered out, but that's moving forward. Any questions on that grant at this time?
How many buildings are on the south side in the program?
So there are 10 which are required to get the full amount of the grant, and we've got one building on the north side. It'd be 310 West Main. That's an alternate in case we have something drop out, to make sure that we have 10. But we feel pretty good. There's always the chance that somebody's going to drop out, but knowing the building owners that we've got on the south side, we feel pretty good that they're all going to stick with it.
As far as the grant, we are progressing forward with meeting the deadlines and any of the criteria, the different phases or levels of this. We are on course.
We're on course. If there's no other questions on that, staff, some departments are primarily working from home. I believe the library is primarily working from home. They might be spending some time in the office on their own, getting some things done, but because that facility's closed, they're not, they're working at the same time. Most other departments are rotating shifts to limit the exposure of COVID-19 from spreading throughout the entire department. So they're working a week on and a week off. And I feel that's, while there is some cost to productivity think it's in the best interest of the city that we protect our ability to continue service if we have some infection among our staff. Right now, we don't. So we'd like to keep it that way, but we definitely don't want an entire department getting sick. We had our first training on the new website last Friday, and we have the second training this Friday. Hopefully throughout this week, staff can get their hands on it, start to learn it, ask some or develop some questions. And I'm hoping later this spring we'll be able to make that live. I think both functionally and aesthetically, it's in a far ahead of where we're at right now. So I'm looking forward to that. I can't think of any other projects or topics to touch on, but I'm open to questions.
Are there any additional questions for Jacob? Thanks for that report. 10.0, Mayor and Council reports. 10.1, Mayor's report. I really do not have a report, but I do have a few statements that I would prefer to make. So in correspondences with Brenda Leonard of the Jones County Emergency Management Director, she has been working diligently to procure the necessary PPA, so the masks, face shields, and gowns for healthcare providers and other frontline personnel that require this equipment in their daily work environments. Conversations I've had with Deb Byers and Eric Briesmeister with Jones Regional Medical Center. Their teams and entire staffing at Jones Regional have been hard at work to proactively plan for any type of operational procedures that may be required and coordinating the necessary care that will be needed if the city or county see a surge in patients that require medical care from COVID-19. So I would like to personally thank those individuals and others that I've failed to mention for their hard work in pre-planning for this outbreak in hopes that their time spent was for naught, because we were able to not see those numbers spike. Also, in speaking with some of the local businesses that could remain open as they sell takeout food, they are pleased with the number of to-go orders that have been prepared and appreciate the continued support that they are receiving. With that, as far as other non-essential local businesses that have been forced, in a sense, to close their doors by the government or by the governor's proclamations, those businesses such as clothing, craft, floral, and other various household items. As the public, please remember that these businesses have websites and they may be offering online sales. So if you are considering making future purchases of these items, to reach out to those local businesses, as well as they may be offering at this time for your purchase, pre-purchase of cards that you can utilize once their doors reopen. I also encourage all of our local businesses to reach out to Jones County Economic Director Derek Lumsden and Chamber of Commerce Director Leanna Boone for assistance with maneuvering through or getting direction on the various federal and state rescue initiatives that have been made available for small businesses. Some of those funding avenues have reached their maximum allotment are timed out, although some are still available. And both directors indicated to me that they would be more than happy to assist the local businesses with routing the necessary applications. Again, we are in unprecedented times, having to change the way we conduct council meetings, that we also continue to practice what the president and governor have said by social distancing. Just remember that we will get through this. Faith, family, and community are the most important, and there will be brighter days to come. That's all I have. 8.3 council reports. Excuse me, 10.2 council reports.
I guess I'll start.
All right, covered like, oh, go ahead.
Okay. I don't have much to report either. It's pretty quiet on the home front. I will say that we're doing what we can at our business. We're what they consider a necessary business because of the mechanical work we do and the body work that we do. I had made the decision over a week ago to close the shop, not completely. We will answer phone calls and talk to people, and I will step outside and look at their vehicles. But if we do work on them, they drop them off and they have to sit at our shop for 3 days before we start working on them. The virus can't survive unless it has a host. And after a certain period of time, what I understand is approximately 3 days, it's broken down into its DNA parts. You can get that DNA on your person and you won't get sick because of it. So we make the vehicle will set in our shop for 3 days, and on the 4th day, just to be on the safe side, we go another day, we start working on it. Same with deliveries and everything. Everything's set in a shed outside of the shop, carried out there by the person who delivers it or us with gloves. And we wait for 4 days before we bring that in to install it on a vehicle. So we're doing what we can to keep our employees safe and myself safe so I can work here and do what I'm supposed to be doing. So other than that, the food center is closed down and there's just not a lot going on. So everybody stay safe out there.
Thanks, Alan.
Said Rod, Brenda's working very hard and trying to hard to get stuff, but she's working on it. And just kind of gets home when she said they're looking for body bags and refrigerated trailers, and hope it don't come to that in Jones County. That's it.
Thanks, John. Any other council reports? .0 public with business with the council on items not on the agenda.
And since it's been a while, I just remind people that if you'd like to talk, you can either raise your hand or send me a chat. Which I'll wait a couple more seconds to see if anybody comes through, but there's nothing yet. And I still don't see anything, so I'll say at the moment, I don't think we have any public comment.
All right. Well, thank you, Rebecca. Thanks again for taking your time out tonight to coordinate and to stand guard on these Zoom meetings.
You're
And
welcome.
putting me back on when my internet goes off.
You're welcome, Kay.
Thank you.
12.0 motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion by
Second.
Rich, second by Galen. Anybody opposed?
No question.
Meeting's adjourned. Thanks, everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you.